after Lionel's invitation earlier this week. Perhaps we'll do it again. In the meantime, I want to turn to something that's been sort of a pet peeve of mine for a while. And it actually was inspired, the sermon was inspired by something that happened a couple of months ago when I received a call from Paperman's to tell me that there was a Shaare Zedek funeral. When they told me the name didn't ring any bells, so thanks to Billy, who set us up on our cell phones that we can look through the database very quickly, put the name in, nope, nothing there. So, okay, I speak to the family, and they're very insistent that the burial takes place at Shaare Zedek, so I say to them, can I ask what the connection is with Shaare Zedek? And the husband said to me, oh, yes, because we were married there 38 years ago, and that's our shul. I said, okay, very nice, okay, and can I ask you, when was the last time you were at Shaare Zedek? And he said, well, 38 years ago on my wedding. So then I think he grasped what I was getting at, and he said, look, Rabbi, he says, I've got to tell you something. I am not religious. That's clear, obviously, because I haven't seen him in the 20 years I've been here. But he says, I'm very spiritual. And this, and I'm sure Rabbi Moses will agree with me when I say this is a mantra that we hear on a regular basis. I would say I hear it at least once, if not twice a week. Rabbi, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. And I've got to tell you something, that in my over 30 years, I was thinking this morning, it's 32 years in ministry, I've heard this, and I've said to people, what do you mean by spiritual? I've yet to come up with one plausible answer that anybody can give me. What does that mean? So let's see if over the next few minutes we can figure out the difference between religious and spiritual, and the connection between religion and spirituality. Now, let's start with this week's Torah reading. This week's Torah is in Parshat Tazriah. In fact, most of the entire book of Leviticus could be held up as an example of what people who think of themselves as spiritual find very problematic with religion. This week's Torah portion is mostly about skin diseases, about contamination, ritual impurity, with a mention of menstruation and circumcision thrown in for good measure. Now, some might say that it would be very hard to find a less spiritual connection in the entire Torah. But what do we really mean by spiritual? I read an article just last week about a recovering drug addict who told Rabbi Weinreb that religion is for people who are afraid to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who have already been there. The recovering addict explained that people require a feeling of connectedness to a higher being. That's spirituality. And I think most people who call themselves spiritual but not religious would agree. Spiritual is about a feeling. Many people say that they can most strongly feel God's presence in nature. A feeling of awe, a presence of God. I got to tell you that when I hear Elise singing, to me, that's the closest I get the whole week to the spiritual feeling. Some people sit on the beach and they watch a fantastic sunset, and that's their spiritual connection. For many years, the spiritual experience of feeling connected to God is missing from their synagogue experience. And it saddens me to admit it, but this may be a bigger problem for conservative Judaism than for any other denominations. any other of the denominations. Why do I say that? Because conservative Judaism has long been associated with an intellectually rigorous approach to Judaism. Rabbi Solomon Schechter was an acclaimed scholar, famous for his work on the Cairo Geniza, who was president of the Jewish Theological Seminary, the conservative movement's flagship institution from 1902 to 1915 when he died. He was instrumental in cementing the institution's academic standing. That spiritual experience, the sense of being connected with God, is the heart, the mystical experience. Rabbi Dr. Louis Finkelstein, Zevtal Ivracha, was the chancellor of JTS from 1940 to 1972. The attitude of the seminary to mysticism and spirituality is highlighted most beautifully by the way that Finkelstein introduced a lecture by Gershom Scholem, a renowned scholar of Kabbalah. He opened it by saying the following: Jewish mysticism is Narishkeit, but the study of Narishkeit, well, that is scholarship. So let me introduce you to a great scholar. All religions, including Judaism, have their origins in a mystical experience. How else can you possibly explain God speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai? An encounter with a burning bush. Jacob's famous dream of a ladder reaching to heaven with angels rising and descending. The Christian mystic, Thomas Merton, he taught that there is religious content, religious or spiritual experience in every religion. The religious experience, the transcendental moment, the instant where God feels manifest in our lives, is the same across all cultures. The feeling that we've we've achieved what the Buddhists call enlightenment, what the Jews call dveikut, or cleaving to God, the Christians might experience as the faith that comes through grace. It's all the same feeling regardless. What changes from religion to religion is the content, the way we interpret, the way we understand those revelations from the divine. You know, Merton traveled to Asia and spent a fair amount of time in Thailand. And he reported that sometimes he felt a greater connection with some of the Buddhist monks than with some of his own brothers at the Trappist monastery in Kentucky, because he shared the experience which he believed was the essence with the Buddhists, in contrast to some of his brothers back in Kentucky in the monastery who only shared the content, the window dressing. But Merton was not satisfied with only the experience. The content that still mattered, and thus he remained a Christian monk for all the days of his life. He didn't leave religion simply because he had found the spiritual, because he had had a feeling. Fortunately, we are no longer so anti-mystical. There is a greater openness to reclaiming the spiritual side of Judaism, what we call Neochassidism. Neochassidism incorporating the spirituality that's infused in the teachings of Chassidism into contemporary Judaism. It's growing. It's hugely popular. Rabbis, Aleim HaShalom, such as Zalman Schachter Shlomi, Shlomo Carlebach, or people like Art Green, JTS's Abraham Joshua Heschel, did much work to reconnect the religious experience with the religious content. Religion and spirituality need each other. They cannot work on their own. They're not in opposition to each other. They are complementary to each other. But spirituality without religion is also lacking. And what is the point of having a nice feeling if you don't do anything with it? You know, the Dalai Lama said that the reason he pursued enlightenment wasn't that he was seeking a powerful religious experience or spiritual experience for its own sake. He said he pursued enlightenment because it would make him a more compassionate individual. Ultimately, the most important thing is to be compassionate to other people and creatures. There was a famous Jesuit priest named James Merton, and he said that being spiritual but not religious can lead to complacency and self-centeredness. And he's 100% right. If it's just you and God in your room, and a religious community makes no demands on you, why do anything? Why help the poor? Why be part of a greater good? How many times have people said to me, Rabbi, you know, we do all the holidays. And I say, okay, well, what does that mean? Which holidays? And they say, well, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I said, what about all the others? Oh, no, we don't do those because we're not religious per se, we're spiritual. Without the religious community, if the religious community doesn't make demands on you, the feeling wanes. Some people say that organized religion is a problem. The organized religion leads to wars, leads to power struggles, leads to greed. You know, there's a beautiful parable told of God and the devil. God and the devil, it says, were walking down a path one day when God spotted something sparkling by the side of the path. God bent down and he picked it up and held it in the palm of his hand and he said, truth. I have in my hand truth. Here, give it to me, said the devil. I'll organize it for you. Organized religion gets a really bad rap among the spiritual but not the religious. Because people need, of course, a reason not to be religious and deal with all that's involved with that. But organized religion does much good. People don't need religion to start wars. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has nothing to do with religion. Even the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is not about religion. It's about the same thing. The battle between Russia and Ukraine and Israel and the Palestinians is over land and resources. Organized religion does an incredible amount of good. It takes that sense of connectedness that comes with a spiritual experience and applies it to helping people the world over. Think of all the soup kitchens. Think of all the homeless shelters run by religious communities. The stores that give away food. The clothing stores. Within our own community, look at the work of various religious institutions. The way we here stepped up and sponsored Syrian refugees, even though Syria is still officially in a state of war with Israel. Religion and spirituality belong together, not in opposition. Why do our Psalms have so many references to nature? Because indeed, it's often easiest to feel God's presence in nature. And we seek to remind ourselves that the feeling that it brings can infuse our prayers and take them to a higher level. There is a teaching that says that the Jew should say 100 blessings a day. We, of course, have 19 blessings in the weekday, the Amidah, as well as the morning blessings. But we have blessings for all sorts of occasions. Unique. And some very mundane. We have blessings to say when we wash our hands. We have blessings to say each time we come out of the bathroom. Blessings before and after we eat. There are special blessings we say when we see a rainbow, a friend you haven't seen in a long time. Seeing somebody of incredible repute a king or queen. Or when we cross an ocean, when we're on a plane, when we come out of a sickness. These blessings are intended to help us add spirituality to our daily lives, to momentarily increase our God consciousness. Yes, some people are spiritual but not religious, and some are religious but not spiritual. However, almost every religious tradition, including Judaism, would say that the ideal is to be spiritual and religious, to bring the power of feeling God's presence into both our religious and our daily lives. So remember, whatever good feelings that you might have, connect it to some religious act. It'll take it to a whole new level. And if you're practicing religion, try connecting through some form of spiritual realm, be it a vista, be it somebody else next to you that elevates you. The two go hand in hand. Shabbat Shalom.